Signore e signori, buonasera, good evening. My name is Stefano Albertini. I'm an immigrant and I'm also the director of Casa Italiana, Zerilli-Marimò. Thank you. I take it there are a few of us here. Thank you. We have the great pleasure tonight of having as a guest in the series Le Conversazioni, Hidden Gems, Siri Hustvedt, and Antonio will present her briefly when she comes to the stage. Briefly, I want to tell you what this series is about for those of you who are here for the first time. Antonio invites guests, it can be writers, authors, like the case is tonight, but also film directors, actors, and other intellectuals of many different kinds and from many different ways of life. And together they discuss 6 films, 3 each, that they think deserve a second chance, or that were always ignored, and so they deserve a first chance to be seen. And their choice is completely free. They don't even don't try to make a connection between the films that Antonio chose and the films that Siri. They do whatever they want. And this great freedom is actually part of the stimulating conversations that we have in this occasion. Hidden Gems, that is the series that we have here at the Casa, is part of a much larger organization of events that is Le Conversazioni, originally born in Capri, not a bad place to start anything, right? And Antonio and Davide Azzolini are the founders of the series that has conversations mostly on literature, but also on other topics, from cinema to architecture to art. Capri remains the main stronghold of Le Conversazioni, but it expanded to many other parts of the world, mostly in Italy and the US, but also in other nations, and Antonio can tell you more if you're interested in. I don't want to take more time for the introduction, but allow me a little pitch for the home in which you are tonight. We just found out a few days ago that we've been nominated for a Webby. Do you know what a Webby is? I didn't know what a Webby was until 2 days ago. So a Webby is like the equivalent of an Oscar for websites. So a few months ago, we launched our new website. And it was more than a year of work for me, my team, a lot of other people involved. We had a lot of fun. It was a lot of energy required on our part, a lot of time, a lot of ideas. And we are very happy with the results. So now we are, when we say we've been nominated, there are 5 finalists, I think, yes. Here we are, 28%. So there is somebody who's at 32. Will you help us to beat them? And as I said in my short message, in which I invite all the friends of the Casa, first of all, you know that we organize more than 120 events every year, and they're all free and open to the public. And they range from music to literature to theater to cinema to politics to history and everything else. And we also have a great treasure of stuff in the website. We have hundreds and hundreds of hours of recording of events like this. We have original content, documentaries, short films, and so on and so forth. We have articles, we have photographs. So it's really a treasure trove. So if we win this thing, probably a few more people are going to find out what we do, and they're going to use the material we have prepared for all of you with great love and passion. So please remember to vote for us. But without further ado, I want to say a few things just about Antonio. As you know, he's a professor here at New York University in the Department of Film and Television at the Tisch School of the Arts. He is also a correspondent. He just changed testata. He just changed the newspaper of reference. So he moved from La Repubblica to Il Foglio. This is the most prominent opinion newspaper, daily newspaper in Italy. And his latest book is a collection of stories about the people that he had a chance to meet, encounter since he moved to New York some 30 years ago, right? We arrived more or less at the same time. It's about more than 600 pages. It's doing very, very well. There are people from Ingrid Bergman to Patti Smith, you name it, they are in the book. And with the very personal contact that they had with Antonio. That doesn't only interview people, he normally invites them to dinner or lunch thanks to his wonderful life jockey who is here with us. And he makes them feel at home. And that's what you have in those stories. That there are people that put down the helm and the armor, and they are themselves talking to a friend. So that's Antonio's latest book. And I just want to mention that, again, when is the next event for this series, Antonio?
May 13.
May 13, and we have who? Anthony Appia, very good. And then, of course, we have Siri Hustvedt, who is an essayist, a novelist, and she's the author of her latest book is Mothers, Fathers, and Others. We also have the pleasure of having here with us tonight a very special guest, the former Minister of Culture of the French Republic, Rima Abdul Malik. Please welcome her. Madam Minister, just let me tell you how envious we Italians are of the way in which your country deals with culture. It's a good envy. It's a good envy. So you were one of the protagonists of the French politics regarding culture. We are envious and we look at it as a model. Thank you. And without further ado, please welcome Antonio Monda and Siri Hustvedt.
Thank you so much. Benvenuti. Welcome back to Le Conversazioni. Let me just add one word about my friend Siri. She's not only an extraordinary essayist and a wonderful novelist, but she's an extraordinary woman and a generous one. Thank you, Siri.
Thank you. Is this, oh, it works? Okay, good.
So we have a long program. Stefan already explained what this program is about. I would like to start with Siri's first choice. Let's watch the film and then we'll comment.
Okay.
Okay. Why don't we start? So the year is 1953, the film The Bigamist. Siri, why this film?
Well, I've seen it now, I think 3 times. And I always have a similar reaction. Ida Lupino is the director of the film, and there you see her as the one of the 2 actresses. The other is Joan Fontaine, and the movie is about bigamy. Our hero marries 2 women. What's extremely interesting about it for me is that there's really no moral judgment in the film, and the central character between the 2 women is absolutely a kind of morally good person. He traps himself into the second marriage with Ida Lupino because she gets pregnant, and he wants to be a stand-up guy. So this is a critique of conventions that swallow you whole. And the ambiguity and the psychological study between the 2, if you will, the 2 couples with the man at the center interests me a great deal. This was not the kind of movie that the studios could make. It was made by a little company that Ida Lupino set up with her producer husband, Collier Young. And they did these black and white kind of sociological studies that I find really interesting. But it's also gripping movie making. I mean, they really knew what they were doing.
You mentioned Collier Young, who was married at the time, actually with Joan Fontaine, which mirrors what happens in the film.
It's fascinating. I mean, you can't help but imagine that there was some projection because Ida Lupino had been married to Young, then he married Joan Fontaine, and she married Howard Duff, I think, the actor. So, and they remained friends. I think that's another important element if you want to do biographical studies of this, that Collier Young and Ida Lupino worked together after they had divorced.
Do you consider this film as a proto-feminist film?
I do. I think what you feel in the movie that's handled very deftly is that Joan Fontaine, who you discover, the whole movie turns around an adoption. She discovers, this is his first wife, that she can't have children. And then she throws herself into the business that they do, which happens to be deep freezers. He is a salesman of deep freezers, and which was, you know, a going thing in 1953. And she's a highly accomplished partner for him, and you get that, and it's played very well in the film. I think Joan Fontaine is also extremely moving in the part, and then she realizes he had suggested that they should adopt children. She then understands that that is what she wants. And so it's the discovery of the bigamy happens because of the investigation by the adoption. And it's played by Santa Claus, Gwen, right? That's his last name, right? Yeah. And his first name is the same as Edmund. Edmund Gwen, yes.
Ida Lupino was a pioneer, filmmaker, screenwriter, producer. She made around 60 films as an actress and 8 as a director.
Yeah.
All of them interesting in different ways.
They're all interesting, yeah.
And then she had a very peculiar career because she was the one. She moved into television. She directed Twilight Zone, several episodes, and this is the only film where she directs and acts.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I guess it's the first time in a sound picture that there's a woman director who is also acting in the film.
When did you see this film for the first time?
It's not that long ago. I saw it with my late husband, Paul Auster. We had a long story of watching films, especially old films, every night we were home. And we both were struck by it. And then I saw it once again, and then now before this, I watched it. And I really have the same response. You know how sometimes with works of art of any kind, that you can return to it and find, say, flaws that you hadn't noticed, or you don't have the same feeling. But I think this is a really strong film, and the 3 main characters have a lot of psychological nuance. And I think that's what really draws me to the film.
Okay, thank you. Let's go now to my first choice, which is an Hungarian film. And it's directed by Béla Tarr. Let's watch it. Believe me or not, this is the opening shot.
Yes,
and this film is made only with 30 shots, 30 long takes, each of them long 300 seconds or more. And it's almost completely silent. The first part of the dialogue starts after half an hour. And when I saw it, I was terrorized by the film, but at the same time mesmerized.
Yes.
Fascinated, because it's quite unique. The director is Béla Tarr, and the title refers to the horse that supposedly Friedrich Nietzsche embraced when he had a mental breakdown, telling the horse, Mutter, ich bin dumm, which means, Mother, I'm stupid.
Yeah.
And in the film, nothing really happens. You follow this horse, you meet the owner of the horse, his wife, they eat, they insult each other, end of the film.
Yeah.
Believe me, it's quite a unique experience. Did you know it?
No, yes, but I didn't see it again, but I have seen it, and I think it's one of those film experiences where it's true that you don't actually exactly know what you're seeing, right? I had that with Even Dwarves Started Small, you know, that I saw many years ago at the Thalia, and I left it thinking, I have no idea what I saw, what just happened to me, but it left a dream impression, and that's what I think about this film, that you remember it as if you dreamed it.
Absolutely true. I agree. And it says also that it's possible to make films very different. in a very different way. There is not a unique way to make movies. Béla Tarr's most famous film, Satan Tango, lasts 9 hours. And even then, there is very little that happens. But I strongly, and I'm not joking, recommend you to watch this film.
Okay.
Call me afterwards. Let's watch now Siri's second choice.
Okay.
Thank you,
Yes.
Siri, for picking a Lubitsch film.
Yes. Well, this has a little backstory. Not long after my husband and I met, we saw Clooney Brown at the Thalia, the old standby movie theater that many of us still miss. And I loved the film. There was something that you couldn't get it on VCR, or this is a long story, DVD. And then years after not being able to see the film, although Paul and I found it once in Paris in a movie theater, my daughter Sophie, who's here, and her father found it at the VCR store. I had been requesting it for about 5 years. They found it, and it was wonderful to see again. I've seen it many, many times, and full disclosure, I wrote the little criterion essay for the movie.
Why did you pick this particular?
So this particular movie for me wins the day as actually another feminist film, because that you heard it here. There are 2 themes. One is keeping your place. She's been told that's both a class story and a woman's story. Don't leave your place. That's what her Uncle Arn keeps telling her, know your place. And the other is plumbing. And so the reference, the bang, 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 is that Clooney Brown loves to plumb. And the plumbing is, of course, a running sexual joke through the film. She gets waylaid from the charming Charles Boyer, who's playing a Czech philosopher who's left. This is set in 1938. So looming over the film is the war that's coming to England. Catastrophe to more than plumbing is haunts the entire movie, and she makes the mistake of fixing a clogged sink for a pharmacist who's become interested in her, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Wilson is also clogged. He has a completely nasal voice, and his mother, this is, the kind of lower English middle classes, and she, Una O'Connor, a great actress, plays Mrs. Wilson and never says a word. She plays her role by clearing her throat throughout her entire part. Another clog metaphor. And, of course, it ends well. Charles Boyer and Jennifer Jones, Adam Belinsky, and Cluny escape together and end up in New York, which used to be a place of freedom.
I found a quote from Lubitsch. Every good film is full of secrets. A film is beautiful when it's mysterious, with several unsaid things. Do you agree?
Absolutely. I think this is true of literature, too, and true of all art. Let's go for the whole business. It is true of all art because I think that something quite terrible has happened, which is the idea that in any work of art, things should be fully articulated. And that happens in words such as accessible, relatable. As I always say, accessible to whom and relatable to whom? Those are establishing a relation, but the word has come to mean everything is said, everything is unmysterious, and I'm not at all interested in any art like that.
I couldn't agree more. If I ask you, how would you define the Lubitsch touch? What would you say?
I know. I think I articulated it something like this, that there's a kind of grace that hovers over these films like a halo. And I definitely feel that. And actually, I have to say the script is extremely witty and well done. There's really no waste in the editing in this film, and I've seen it so many times that, I keep admiring it. And yes, the sexual metaphor is, in a way, so charming. And, at the very end of the film, Charles Boyer pulls her into a train. He's leaving the countryside to go to London. And he says, if I were rich, he's a poor anti-fascist philosopher. If I were rich, he said, I'd build you a great mansion with the most complicated plumbing. And I would give you a hammer and let her bang, bang, bang. And I think this is, it's better than looking at sex, right? I mean, looking at sex is often, in film, it's often not so good. It's not really erotic. But plumbing does the job. Very sexy, very sexy.
I just want to say that Billy Wilder, who was his friend, pupil, he wrote for him, collaborator, he wrote for him in Ninochka, delivered the eulogy of Ernst Lubitsch. And the end of the eulogy was, there will be no more Ernst Lubitsch. What is worse, there will be no more Ernst Lubitsch films.
Yeah, and it's true. Lubitsch, just one more quote from Lubitsch, because he's such a wonderful character. He said, I've been to Paris, France, and I've been to Paris Paramount, and I like Paris Paramount better. So, the world of the imagination, the fantasy dreams of the imagination is what Lubitsch chose.
Let's go to my second choice, which is an Italian film by Marco Bellocchio, one of the masters of Italian contemporary cinema. Is still working. Let's watch it. He's now 85, and this is a film made in 2001, Good Morning, Night, Buongiorno, notte. I don't know how many amongst you are familiar with this film, but it's about the Moro assassination, and it is based on the memoir written by Anna Laura Braghetti, who was one of the terrorists, called Il Prigioniero is the title of the book. I always admire Marco Bellocchio's film. In particular, Fist in the Pocket, there are few students in my Italian cinema class. It's a masterpiece. But I want to be honest, I completely disagree with his ideas. I respect him as an artist, a true artist, and he's also an extraordinarily generous and open-minded man. Then all of a sudden, he makes these films where someone he should hate, President Moro, is treated not only with respect, but even with admiration. Yeah. And I think a man who does something like this deserves totally my respect and my admiration. Yeah. And not only, he has the courage to edit a letter written by the partisan killed by the Nazi, together with the letter written by Aldo Moro, who would be killed soon by the communist terrorists. So it's a great act of courage, which was not well received in Italy. The film didn't win anything in Venice, although it was the favorite, because the president of the jury, a great Italian filmmaker, Mario Monicelli, hated the film.
Okay.
And I don't know if you're familiar with it.
But it was, but politics was the sort of moving issue then.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it was, although it was made 22 years ago, maybe it was too early.
Yeah.
And as many great artists, he's a prophet. He's a man who understands the future before us. And I always admire his honesty, even when I disagree. He's completely sincere. I don't know if you're familiar with his most recent films, Kidnapped or Rapito, or Vincere, about Mussolini's son. But if you see all these films, you always understand that there is a fil rouge, the attempt to understand the truth, the longing for the truth. And sometimes he does it in a rebellious way, other times in a very meditative, calm, dreamy way. This is the case of Good Morning.
Just from what you're saying, it's the movement into more than one perspective. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And by the way, the title comes from a poem by Emily Dickinson, and which is quoted during the film. I just want to add that the actress is Amaya Sansa, while the actor is Bellocchio's son, Pier Giorgio Bellocchio. And if you don't know this film, I strongly recommend it to watch.
Following up on what Siri was mentioning, the difference of perspective, then Bellocchio made a TV series.
Oh, yes.
In every episode, there is the perspective of it.
Yeah. Yes.
You provoke me, Siri.
No, good.
The difference of perspective is very important. So much so that as a sort of a follow-up to this film, Bellocchio also made a TV series, 4 episodes of it. Yes, and we presented it here, in which in every episode, about the same story. So the kidnapping of the president of the Christian Democrats and his assassination. And the interesting thing is that in every episode, there is the point of view of a different protagonist of the story.
Yes.
So there is the point of view of Moro, of the prime minister, of the wife, and of the Pope, who was a very personal, close friend of Moro. So bringing the idea of different perspective to a different level, in which in every episode there is a different perspective on the same story. And
Okay. No, that's very interesting.
Okay, let's go now to Siri's third and final choice.
Yeah.
So the film is set during the Nazi occupation in Poland.
It's 1942-43. Rosa, the woman, has escaped a train. She got off the train with her husband and daughter, but they are separated. And Leon, the character Aman Müllerstahl, takes her in, finds her, and most of the film, I mean, there is a plot. There are other characters in the village, but the intense drama is between this man and woman, and she is held captive. They're both, again, as my interests, it's a very complicated relationship. And I'm glad that clip was picked, actually, because she says, "You keep me captive." And, you know, the question of, I mean, he does rape her, but she is also, of course, completely dependent on him. And they do have a friendship. For this event, for the first time, I've seen, again, this film a number of times. I know Agnieszka Holland. It's 1985, for those of you who want to know. And I read a few, you know, like film reviews and commentary, and I was shocked by how lacking in subtlety the reviewers were. You know, it's like people said, "Oh, it veers into melodrama." Melodrama? We have a woman jumping off a train, a Jew, who's, you know, and even to use that word for this kind of story seems to me so benighted. I mean, anyway, they were big disappointments. The richness of the film is, I think, also, again, there is a class difference. She arrives off the train in a fur coat. She comes from a completely different class from this peasant. And she's Jewish. He studied for the priesthood. We have all these binaries going on, but he's a man and she's a woman. And I also think that that hierarchy allows a kind of use of her, a control of her that is extremely disturbing. But it also mirrors, you know, the hierarchies outside the story. I mean, he is an anti-Nazi, but he's frightened, which, again, is something understandable. It is not a black and white story at all. And the moral complexities are extremely rich and unresolved.
Do you see any redeeming quality in Armin Mueller's style?
I think, you know, you look. I think what I feel is that he is a lonely, tender person, or has tender impulses, who is nevertheless, you know, weak and unable, how shall I put it, to think himself out of his own trap, right? He's a kind of almost belligerent Catholic in the you know, he's not flexible. And I mean, it is a really sad story. She kills herself in the end. But the nuances continue because the husband shows up with the daughter of a character in the film, a Jew who's murdered in the woods. And they actually end up in America, and he gets a letter, and in the letter, the daughter thanks him for his goodness to the mother, her mother. And he's, of course, lied. He said that she left when she actually killed herself in that basement. So you see the complexity of what happens, and there's another wonderful scene where she kind of gets him to dance with her after they've argued about religion, which is quite wonderful. And I think it's deeply human. And in the moment we're living, everyone, a moment of all kinds of moral compromises that are happening all around us in this city and in this country, that nobody knows how you're going to be until it happens. So this movie is a kind of primer in what happens when you find yourself in genuine danger, you know, war, oppression, totalitarianism, whatever. I think it's worth looking at and thinking about those moral ambiguities.
2 years ago, Agnieszka Holland directed another extraordinary film called Green Border. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, yes.
Because I think it's another film where moral ambiguity, you know, dominates.
Absolutely.
It was presented in Venice and won one of the top prizes. And she is one of those filmmakers that still has not been recognized as she deserves. She's
absolutely, and part of that, you know, she is a filmmaker. She worked with Wajda, the famous filmmaker in Poland, but then she was kind of in exile. Agnieszka is a person, I mean, she lives in Paris, but she's been wandering around, a kind of person without a country, if you will. And I think that's hurt. And, you know, we also know that women filmmakers have a tendency to have a much harder time.
From what I read now, she's preparing a series based on Rosemary's Baby.
Oh,
starring Zoe Saldana. I read it
Good
today.
for Agnieszka. I don't know.
I was surprised, to be honest.
Actually, when Sophie was a little girl, she was in Washington Square. Actually, a very good movie that Agnieszka made too.
In Washington Square?
Yes, the
true.
Henry James. And
Sophie was
in it. She had a little child part running back and forth. And I was an extra too.
Let's go now to the final choice, an American film directed by John Huston, based on a Rudyard Kipling novella.
Oh yeah, this is a great film.
I think
It's a wonderful film.
Let's watch it. John Huston started thinking about this film in the 50s. He wanted to have Humphrey Bogart in the lead. And it's about two imposters, Michael Caine and Sean Connery, who are lost in Kafiristan. And the tribes believe that Sean Connery is a divinity. Of course, it's not true. And they try to use this, to exploit this situation in order to make money, to steal all their treasures. When they realize they're not divinity, they kill them. But in this very final moment, there is an act of, it's so moving, you know. I know you know the film and you love it. Do you like John Huston's work? Because he made almost all adaptations from other books. Moby Dick, The Maltese Falcon, Treasure of Sierra Madre, most of them wonderful films.
Yeah.
And I think he was a great actor. Do you remember Chinatown, the Noah Cross character?
Yeah.
And sometime he went over the top. He did even a version of the Bible, which is not a wise idea, for a film. but definitely a filmmaker that we should reconsider. How do you like as actors, Sean Connery and Michael Caine?
I think they're wonderful. I think they're enormously charming.
Yes.
And in this film, they win your heart, and they're con artists, basically, but very well directed. These
absolutely,
two guys,
absolutely. And one of the great talents of Huston was how he would get the best from his actors. Always.
Yeah.
It's time to go, but I have a little surprise.
Okay.
We usually end this conversation with a comic relief.
Okay.
And this will happen. But this is also an homage to a great actor who passed away a few weeks ago. In my opinion, it was the embodiment of the strength and loneliness of American spirit. But he was such a talented actor that he could do not only strong and sometimes violent characters, but also funny ones. His name was Eugene Allen, but we know him by Gene Hackman. And this is the scene that I want to show you. It's time to thank Siri Hustvedt, Professor Albertini, and all the audience. Thank you so much. I look forward to coming back here at Casa Italiana on May 13. Thank you.